Hello, hello, and a great and glorious morning to you on this beautiful Onpassive day. My name is Jeffrey, and I'm hoping to encourage you, but it might take just a little bit of finesse. It's going to be kind of like going around our elbow to get to our thumb. Now, we know that things have been pretty tough for the past several weeks, especially for Mr. Mufar and his entire family, but we also know that they're all winners, and this is to say that they're pulling through with flying colors, and we are extremely grateful for their health and their recovery. And you know that Ash and his family are part of something larger than life, right? And we call that thing Onpassive. And it's true that as much as I try, it's difficult to express just how big it is or to explain the impact that it's going to have. So to provide a little more understanding, let's see if we can figure how Onpassive is part of something much grander, using some pretty big strokes to paint a picture, I guess, about where humanity is and where we are headed, not only as humanity, but how Onpassive fits into the whole thing. So before you completely dismiss some of what I say as crazy, just know that the changes I talk about are all searchable. I've spared some of the details simply because there's things going on that are unconscionable. I will mention, or I'm going to plan on mentioning, a couple of basic search terms later that you can use to get started. So let's get back to how Onpassive is much bigger than you think and how it's part of something much grander. Now, I'm also going to use the term awareness, and when I do that, I'm talking about consciousness. And it's not as complicated as it may sound, right? Because consciousness, at its simplest, is just an awareness of existence. And that includes internal and external existence, as well as how we are all connected on the planet. You see, Onpassive is a conscious business with global economic significance. It was born for a time such as this. We were born to be a component, if you will, of a new cycle of a raised awareness for humanity. And the phrase conscious business, quote unquote, relates to a business strategy that benefits both human beings and the environment. And unless you've been living under a rock somewhere in the Mojave Desert, you know the planet and humanity is experiencing pretty severe changes. So our ancestors, the indigenous peoples of the planet, told us these big changes were coming, and we've entered the period that they had talked about. For those paying attention, indications of these changes were starting to be seen and felt pretty doggone good in the 1990s. Excuse me. As we passed the millennium and went through 2012, that was a marker, December of 2012. When we passed that, we started seeing that things started popping onto our radar that we hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to, if we saw them at all. I mean, some did, obviously, but certainly not a majority by any definition. And now we're seeing changes that represent the beginning of the highest consciousness this planet has ever known. So how do we get higher consciousness, and why is this happening? Well, I'm sure you've heard of good vibes and bad vibes. You know, when you maybe go into a room and you meet somebody and for no reason at all, you either really like being around them or you don't like it at all. Well, this happens because we have what we call a biosphere. It's our quantum energy signature, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, that surrounds us. And it reaches out and touches and intermingles with the other fields that are around us, right? It's the personal quantum energy field, and it interacts with others. And if the two of them don't really resonate, so to speak, you get these weird vibes. You see, everything is vibration, and that includes your energy and your consciousness. And the higher the vibration, which is frequency, the higher the consciousness. So the question becomes, how do we raise our consciousness? Well, stating it pretty simply, we just raise our energy. And you can think of it like this. Our lives have contrasts that define upper and lower limits of everything that we do. If you have something hot, in other words, then there's got to be something cold, right? So using heat energy as an example, the coldest thing that something's going to get according to Newtonian physics anyway, is absolute zero, which is 273 degrees and change, below zero in Celsius. No matter where you are on the scale, the higher you go, the hotter it gets. Now, the highest anything can get as far as being hot is 1420 followed by 30 more zeros. That's pretty hot. Degrees Celsius. So no matter where you are on that scale, toward either end, the higher you go, the hotter it gets. The lower you go, the colder it gets. Now, this applies to consciousness energy as well, the frequency of emotion too. And this can be seen on what we call the Hawkins scale. Now, at the low end, we experience things like shame and guilt. About halfway up, we start feeling courage, and then you go into neutrality, and then you go into willingness, right? Expectation even. And at the top of the scale, it tops out at enlightenment. So how do we raise our energy? Well, you do that by reaching for the next best feeling. This means if you are depressed or fearful, you reach for the feeling of jealousy or even revenge. I know that sounds weird, but you do that because these emotions are higher frequencies than the depression that you're feeling. Okay? From there, you work your way up, and that's how it kind of works. You go through blame, then you go through doubt, and you go through frustration, boredom, contentment, optimism, and so on up the range to get higher and higher and higher. But we also need to know that the higher our energy is, the more it's going to expand outward toward others, right? And this means, because of the polarity, because of the contrast that we just talked about, that the lower the energy goes, the more it's going to draw inward into ourselves. And the lower our energy is, the more selfish we're going to be. So that's kind of key. Now, the higher our energy is, the more we're going to put others' needs before our own. And that brings us to the second question. Why is this happening? Well, because sometime before the turn of the century, people started moving up that emotional scale. Their vibrational energy started to increase as a way of life, not just, per circumstance. And as we moved up, more energy was created. As we moved higher and higher, because guess what? As we move up, our heightened energy creates more energy. And that's why we have spirals that lead us to higher highs and lower lows. When somebody talks, oh, he's spiraling out of control or spiraling downward, that's because he's got a certain energy. And the more energy of that type you have, the more it's going to create, and it gets stronger and draws momentum. All right? With the raising of the frequency of the human consciousness, right, what we have happening the world over is that it's happening in sufficient numbers large enough to change humanity's consciousness as a whole. And that's why the changes are happening. That's why we're going through what we're going through. And that is exactly why Onpassive has risen onto the scene. Because one man obtained the lifestyle of elevated emotion, right, sufficient to create a vision, Ashmufar's vision of the world, which is devoid of inequality. High emotions of reason and love and joy came about because Mr. Mufar's awareness went up, right, of the human condition, right? It created in him a compassion strong enough for benevolent change that started a chain reaction, because energy creates more energy, right, among a few like-minded people that became and continued to give us what we have today in Onpassive. Now, Galatians tells us, and I'm quoting, right, the Spirit produces love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, humility, maybe I'm paraphrasing, and self-control. Every one of these vibrate at frequencies of high consciousness. And I've never known Mr. Mufara, in the 3 years that I've been working with him and talking to him, to act outside of these types of behavior, right? Now, that's telling me that Mr. Mufara, just like Onpassive, was born for a time just such as now, just like the one we're in. Any earlier, and the low sounding or the surrounding energies that are low, they would not allow any progress for anything that had started, right? Which is why nobody else has done it. If he was born a little later, or Onpassive came a bit later, then somebody else would have done it first, because that's what the typical energy is calling for right now. I mean, look at history. Look back at the Wright brothers. They succeeded in flight about 2 weeks before other people did. Inventors like Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell and quite a few others were credited with inventions simply because they were the first to get the patents, not necessarily the first one to invent what they came out with. And this is the way of it. And what we've just witnessed over the past several weeks was an adjustment of the timeline for Onpassive, because we're not in sync with other things being developed in the new energy that we need to be in sync with or in tune with as a business, especially a conscious business. In short, we were probably several weeks ahead of things that we needed to be in tune with. So God, or the creator of all that is, the universe, the benevolent being of, whatever name you put on God, right, allowed for circumstances to slow our roll just a little bit. And that gave us the time that we need and time that other things needed, and allowed some of us to experience some personal growth, putting it mildly. And incidentally, all these things that are showing up at the same time are what we call synchronicities. And that's, just means we're synchronized with a lot of other things that are going on. So anyway, to get back on track, with a high consciousness maturity, human nature changes toward a benevolent bias. And that's what you see with Mr. Mufara. And we can see this in a lot of areas of late, all right? And although it's a little bit veiled perhaps in today's media, the narrative of today's media, right? There is good news. Now, consider this. For hundreds of years, the inequality of the genders, right, manifested such that men would be over women, so to speak, and that women really didn't or couldn't do anything about it. This has seemed to be human nature for decades, if not hundreds of years, right? Then, rather suddenly, bam, that changed with the pop-up of what we call the Me Too movement, right? And that's because the maturing human nature and consciousness started popping up. That happens when we have a confluence, an intermingling, if you will, of higher ideas that are among a majority, right? And those ideas among that majority take hold and start to work for the greatest good for people on the planet. Because taking our thoughts off ourselves and expanding them outward, right, to produce intention for the greatest good, starts to raise our own consciousness. And that's exactly what is happening within Onpassive. I mean, think about it. When you have 1 million people with the same mindset and the same and that mindset has a bent toward benevolence, right, toward kindness and generosity, it will change the world. And that's what Onpassive is doing and will continue to do. Consider too that some of the clergy, right, or religious leaders, have been responsible for horrendous things that have been done to children and adolescents, for hundreds of years, and they've been getting away with it. And that's not all, right? But when everything comes to light, it's going to devastate the lives of millions. A lot of folks that have put their hope and their love and their life into certain belief systems are going to see that those belief systems have failed us miserably. But right now, following the resignation of the last pope in 2013, there have been big changes. We've seen them. And actually, the new pope has done a lot to bring this out, as well as many other religious leaders. So, that's on the mend. The last example that I'm going to use to reflect the beginning of higher consciousness change actually concerns, human trafficking, all right? Most specifically, though, I'm referring to the slavery of young women that are taken from their families and sometimes have children held, right, in captivity, and have children born in places specifically for the purpose of being, there's no easy way to say it, of service to men, right, to service men. And it doesn't stop there. If you go do an internet search for a few things, say, for instance, deep underground military bases or even quantum finance systems, then you're going to find a rabbit hole that you're going to be able to go down real easy, all right? And it's going to branch off into every kind of corruption, immorality, and wickedness that you can think of. The atrocities are horrifying. They're extremely widespread. They're global. They're rampant. I mean, with thousands and thousands of occurrences, and it's all underground. It's wow. You know, I'm going to just kind of stop there because you know what? It's a lot worse than anything that I've ever described here. And when you see who's involved and how it's being funded, you're probably going to puke first, and then you're going to weep. But that's all coming to an end. I probably won't see it in the next several years, but it's coming. It's coming. For the first time in hundreds of years, we're seeing dark things that are coming into the light. Okay, we're seeing things that have been hidden for a very long time coming out into the open and being made right through compassionate action. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about lifting our minds and our thoughts toward a compassionate way of life and doing things compassionately, right? Compassionate action. And that same kind of compassion and raised consciousness is exactly what brought Onpassive onto the scene at just the right time. So I'm telling you, if you think Onpassive is an accident, you think it's a fluke or a mistake, think again. It's here by design, and it's not a bystander. It's taken part in the actual human evolution, all right? Or put another way, in the evolution of humanity. And I'm talking about consciously, not growing a second finger or something. All right. It's going to aid in the next great reset that we go through, not only by decentralization of the flow of trillions of dollars, but a whole lot more. And it was birthed for this time, and it is right on time. So I want one more thing I want you to consider. Let's talk just for a second, not much, but just for a second about COVID-19. Despite what you may have heard, COVID-19 was not man-made. It came from bats. More specifically, it came from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, that where they were studying the virus in bats. And now this is something to think about for those of you that kind of wonder. Viruses aren't political. But see if you can follow the trail where the virus first popped up and then what country it popped up in next. Because I'm telling you, viruses, they leave a trail of destruction. And they don't pop up in one place and then pop up halfway around the world with nothing in between. So that and much, much more is all going to come out, right? You're not going to be able to miss it. Because, and you can mark my words, those involved will be held to account. Anyway, as strange as it may sound, the pandemic too was right on schedule, because guess what? Without it, we would have been forced, actually, we were forced to take a real good look at ourselves while business as usual on the planet slowed pretty much to a crawl, right? I mean, it slowed way down so that it had the actual effect of an economic crash. Now, when we stop doing things, right? Humanity, people, activity, when we stop doing things that are normal, there is a lot of self-examination that takes place. There's a lot of introspection. In other words, we start looking at how we live and what we believe. And as a result, the things that we've seen and become aware of have given rise to a whole lot of change. I mean, you see that every day. And there's a whole lot of fear, right? And there seems to be a lot of what we call chaos. Now, we've described chaos in past videos as a period of change between old systems and new, and we're in it now, chaos. And we see the change that's occurring in the ways that they're affecting the systems that we have. I mean, on the one side, we're going to see systems stop that stay stopped, that should have been stopped a long time ago. For me, human trafficking and big pharma immediately comes to mind, right? But we're also going to see benevolent systems that couldn't previously get a foothold start to begin and start to develop and progress. Now, Onpassive is one of those systems. In the meantime, we're going to be witnessing an awakening to more injustices than we ever thought existed and that have been here for a long time. So strap in, okay? You're in for a bumpy ride. And we're talking about the kinds of changes like, or the kinds of things that we've talked about or mentioned a little earlier. Now, these injustices are even now being seen, and that's why I've been able to kind of bring them to your attention. And I don't mean just by leaders. I mean by millions of people, just like you and me, that have started to think about our whole connectedness, globally. Now, we're already starting to make better decisions simply because we want those types of things to go away. We aren't going to be putting up with them. And, we all know about corruptions, right? Corruptions that are in the government that have always been there, probably always will. I mean, I hate to say that. Well, I know they won't always be there, but right now they are, and we know about them. And we've talked about this, and even Mr. Mufar has been quoted as saying, we are the correction to the corruption. Now, that's a bold and powerful statement. God bless him. But he's not just talking about government. We've talked previously about corruption in many world systems, like the education or religion and government, business. But Mr. Mufara has also talked about cultural injustices. And we know that they're there. And we're already seeing objections to these things that have been going on for many decades because we're deeming them no longer acceptable. The Me Too movement, right, that we mentioned earlier is just one example. Now, I mention that again because Mr. Mufara recognizes the inequality and he has a very high respect for women, and that honors the feminine gender. Okay, so anybody that wants to give him crap over that, well, let me tell you, I got his back. So, but even beyond that, Mr. Mufara has talked about the inequalities of business and specifically of wealth distribution, or the lack of it, right? He's concerned about a lack of sufficient food and clothing and shelter for so very many, while there's others with so much that live in wasteful or even hoarding extravagance, right? And it's this type of compassionate thinking that is possible only by awakening or raising, if you will, to a wiser and more benevolent, expanding consciousness. And many of us are on that path, a path and a mindset that's not going to tolerate the injustices that we're talking about, the ones we just mentioned, and even others that have been going on for a long time that we haven't mentioned. And it's not just a few of us. Slowly, powerfully, the masses are rising up for a common goal. And we're going to be going to officials. We are actually going to officials. A lot of us are. Going to governments and spiritual leaders, and we're demanding change. But, when the dust settles, that is the message of the day. And Onpassive is locked in step with this message at a global scale. It's a part of the change. It's a catalyst for that change. It's huge. It's enormous. It's benevolent. Got that wrong, but I corrected it. And you're a part of it. And moving into something that has, that very few have actually expected, unless you've been paying attention to what's been going on for the last decade or so. Anyway, Onpassive is a new kid on the block. Powerful, dynamic. As a founder, you're in it to win it. We all know that. But do we know what that means? Well, it means winning the race. And it means the race is winning, the human race. Because Onpassive is an enormous, benevolent business. And its mission is for the good of the human race, to lift up the human condition, to lift humanity through lifting our financial, our cultural, and our environmental conditions across every border on the entire planet. And that starts with you. It starts with me as a founder and those nearest to us. Excuse me. And that happens when we share Onpassive with others that have a vision for a greater good, just like we do, and a very generous attitude. It's the type of mindset that happens when we're not so much concerned about how we're going to profit personally, right, as we are with how we can help others achieve their success. And one of the best ways to help others is by sharing Onpassive with like-minded people. And I'm not saying we have to do that. I'm saying as founders, we're each significant in what we do and that we have the power to make the difference. And together, we can make a big difference in the lives of those around us and everywhere that we go and everything that we touch. But we need to know where we are and that we're not approaching the end and not anywhere near the finish line. We're just getting started. Now, I'm sure a lot of us have heard the verse from Ecclesiastes that says, and again, I'm paraphrasing, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the sun or under the sky or under the heavens, right? Well, right now, Onpassive is in a season of building and synchronizing, of developing products and adding departments and testing every bit of it. As founders, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about the mechanics of it. Let teams from our India people or let Ash's teams in India worry about that. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about the soft launch. It's happening soon. We don't need to worry about the bonuses. They're coming. We don't need to worry about how much we're going to earn after a hard launch. Success is inevitable, and we don't need to be focusing on that right now. But we do need to stay away from negativity, from low energy, right? And to do this, we share it with like-minded people. We steer clear of the folks that are less positive than we are. If we come across people that don't agree with us, and we all know they're out there, I mean, face it, right? But if we come across them, we don't have to accept anything that they're offering. We don't have to do anything with them. We just tell them what we know and how we feel, and we don't have to receive what they're putting out. But if they get close, I'm telling you, Onpassive has enough heart to take care of what needs to be done. And Mr. Mufara said it this way, and I'm quoting. So, Onpassive, as you know by now, has such a spirit, generous spirit, that we're disruptive and we're different. We're unique. We're not typical in any way. To give and empower anybody that comes around us, unquote. But you know what? He also said, and I'm quoting again, not everyone can be a founder. We need to be above average as founders. So that's where we are, right? We want to make sure that the aboveness and the empowerment is what we're focusing on, right? Being above average and empowering anybody that comes around us. This is to say that we really want to focus on building teams and growing networks, on maximizing the potential that we have by taking advantage of what we have available right now. I mean, we can build for free, right? Building our network is going to help us all win bigger together. And we can simply win because we're a founder, and that's really all it takes. So, I mean, get ready, right? In Mr. Mufara's own words, and again, I'm quoting, get ready for the greatest shape of your life. Get ready for the greatest shape of your life. No matter how great it's been, it's just going to get better. See, your future's set, so stay the course. Stop worrying. As founders, we're on the right track. If you aren't a founder yet, please get back with whoever it was that invited you and join that team. If you haven't been invited, but you feel like maybe this is something you can get behind, something that promotes the desire to make a bigger difference than you ever imagined and guarantees your success while you're at it, then I want you to join our team, because that means you have heart. And this is also what Mr. Mufara says. Quote, we want to lift up the lives of those around the world. You cannot lift up humanity without a heart. So just click the registration link in the description box below. Fill out the form and start the journey. I want to thank you so much for listening. Please know that we wish only the best for you and your family and your entire future.